Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this regularly scheduled meeting of the Public Health, Environment, Civil Rights, and Engagement Committee for December 2nd, 2019. My name is Philippe Cunningham, and I am the chair of this committee. With me at the dais are Council Members Cano, Schrader, Gordon, Johnson, and Council Vice President Jenkins. Please let the record reflect that we have a quorum and can conduct the business of this committee. Colleagues, this is the last meeting of the year, so we have a jam-packed, action-filled agenda. Although this is the last meeting of this year, I am excited to announce that you still have 2 more years of me as the chair, at least. So we'll have a good time for 2 more years. All right, so we have 14 items on today's agenda. We have a presentation. We have 3 public hearings, as well as 4 discussion items. We'll go ahead and start with the presentation. We will approve of the consent agenda, open the public hearings, and then move to the discussion items. With that, we will start with item number 1, receiving a presentation on the 2019 Green Business Awards to recognize businesses, organizations, individuals, and our partners for fighting climate change and committing to the health of the people of Minneapolis. I will pass it over now to Director of Environmental Services, Patrick Hamlin, and Health Commissioner, Gretchen Musican.
Hi, my name is Patrick Hamlin. I'm the Director of Environmental Programs for the City of Minneapolis. I realize we have a full schedule today, so I try to keep this as fast as going as fast as I can. I'd love to see all the signs being on this perspective and seeing all the climate change signs that are out there today. That's great. The Green Cost Share Program is a program that provides matching incentives to work with individuals and organizations to make positive environmental change. It started in 2012 working with one business in North Minneapolis called Avistopoulos Dry Cleaners. We worked with Avistopoulos to remove PERC from the dry cleaning process, which is PERC is a hazardous cancer-causing chemical in the dry cleaning business. And that first program, or those first programs the first projects that we did, were leaps of faith and trust. The city's leap of faith was beginning to reinvest its pollution fees in businesses it had always viewed as the cause of environmental problems and not the answer to them. For businesses, it was a leap of faith to trust government agencies they had always known as passing environmental rules that didn't take into account the monumental challenges they all faced just to stay afloat every day. Under this model of trust, we've grown and scaled this program every year since 2012. We became the first city to completely eliminate PERC, not just from Avistopoulos, but from all of our dry cleaners. Today, we work with auto body shops, nail salons, other industries in making changes that are safer for workers and cleaner air for the neighborhoods in which they operate. We've removed over 100,000 pounds of criteria pollutants in our neighborhoods each year, annually. We have strategically expanded the focus of this program to take on the toughest of issues that we faced, climate change. We now work with nonprofits, multifamily buildings, and low-income homeowners through our Lead and Healthy Homes program. We intentionally invest in areas of historic and intentional underinvestment. We intentionally support green zone communities and cultural corridors, and we are twice as likely to receive applications in those areas as a result of our intentional investments. We are focusing benefits on low-income members of our community. In 2018 and 2019, those 2 years alone, we are benefiting close to 1,000 members of our community who are in low-income situations. We are generating over $40 million in wealth from energy savings and production in our communities over project lifetimes. It took all of us, and I see many friendly faces in this room, it took all of us to create this program, from the council offices and their dedicated staff, a mayor that took a chance on this concept, and I don't know if RT made it or not, he was planning to, a mayor that grew this program, and then a current mayor and team that are looking to scale this work to the size of to the scope of our problem, and knowing that we aren't there yet, and we're gonna hear some testimony regarding that later on. We're working with community stakeholders, partner organizations, our partner departments within these walls, and the heroes who are out there getting this work done with their own hard-earned money. Together, we have all grown this program from something small and incremental to something more equitable, scalable here in Minneapolis, and as a national model. There were 3 green cost share projects in 2015, There were 63 projects in 2018, where the awardees are here today, and there are over 240 project sites that we're closing out here in 2019. Yesterday was the first deadline for the 2020 projects. Just last night, I got a call from a solar developer saying they are putting together a package of 100 buildings for low-income solar. It's 100 buildings, that's not 100 units for low-income solar. A combined initiative put together directly as a result of the focused incentives that this council supports, that this mayor supports in our communities through this program. In 2020 and beyond, we'll be working with training centers, developers, and contractors to create pathways to jobs for people in the communities that where these projects are being done, especially in North Minneapolis and South Minneapolis. So we're going to give a shot at recognizing some of the 2018 Green Cost Share heroes today. We broke it into 9 categories: energy efficiency for nonprofit, large business and small business, solar for nonprofit, large business and small business, innovation, and then 4D, our 4D low-income program, or naturally occurring affordable housing program, and then partner awards. For the partnership awards, the first up is the Minneapolis Foundation, and CEO and President R.T. Ryback. I'm not sure if he made it. I did not see him.
Did not make it, but
Oh, you are. Okay, great. I do want to add one thing, is that R.T. Ryback was the one person who took a chance. I shouldn't say the one person. Cam Gordon was a strong supporter starting this program out as well. But we would not be here and doing this work today if it were not for the chance that RT took on this project and this program. But the Minneapolis Foundation has been an important partner with many of the City of Minneapolis endeavors. In 2018, they provided a grant to the Minneapolis Health Department for the Green Cost Share program. This grant provided additional stopgap funding to the program for smaller scale projects. Recently, the foundation has even launched their own climate action and racial equity grant program, adding yet another way for that we can leverage efforts in our communities, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. The Lake Street Council is up next. Small businesses can seemingly be running their own small cities, from rent, utilities, supply shipments, staff scheduling, staying ahead of the competition. The Lake Street Council offers technical and project management assistance to busy small business owners looking at energy efficiency upgrades. The council coordinates and pulls together multiple energy program offerings in a way that makes sense to busy business owners and conducts outreach to small businesses along the Lake Street corridor. They provide needed feedback on our program improvements from the participants they work with, and they have also become a model for the city through the Energy Technical Assistance Program, ETAP, that is now run through CPED. And Matt Kazinka, who's standing up here, was a huge part of pulling, not only doing a lot of on-the-ground work along Lake Street, but also pulling together a really innovative project here at the City of Minneapolis. So thank you. Thank you. Thanks. Diana. Clean Energy Resource Teams. We're here recognizing Minnesota Clean Energy Resource Teams. This group provides vital administrative support to the Green Cost Share team. Each year, this organization convenes a panel of energy, pollution, and pollution experts for every application that comes through our doors. We receive, they provide feedback and ranking for each of those applications and prioritize them. They're also crucial in helping the city spread the word about the program and giving us useful feedback on program delivery. So thank you. Energy efficiency. It's one of the most important tools in the toolbox in the fight against climate change. The most renewable unit of energy is the one we don't even use. The first up for our nonprofit is the Midtown YMCA. You weren't able to make it? Okay. The Midtown YMCA, Eliminating Racism and Empowering Women. It is located in city's Southside Green Zone along Lake Street. With the help of the cost share, the YMCA updated their building automation system for their HVAC, heating, ventilation, air conditioning. This allows the building to use only as much energy as is needed to keep occupied rooms comfortable for those using it. An innovative way to cut down on greenhouse gas emissions and saving money so they can deliver on their mission. Next up is Electric Machinery Company. Nick Bergman. Electric Machinery custom designs and manufactures motors and machinery. They had 2 projects go through the Green Cost Share last year, including installation of air curtains for exterior garage doors to keep the air out. The curtain provides an invisible barrier to the outside that allows operations to run seamlessly while saving money. It is an innovative project that can be replicated elsewhere across industry in our city. And I just want to mention that Nick is a true climate hero, pushing the envelope literally in this, with the case of this project, at his company. This is one of the values that we see in the program, is that it puts resources in the hands of people like Nick. And so, and I apologize, we haven't met, but I'm sure you do great work too. But it puts resources in the hands of people like Nick. And so when they go forward and they're competing, they may be competing with things like marketing and research and development and other projects going on in their company. And so it's tools that folks like Nick can bring forward to get projects done in the company and make the case for ROI at the business. So thank you for the work that you do.
No, didn't get a picture.
They didn't get a picture of you guys.
You gonna come back up?
Oh,
We got time, I think.
okay.
Okay. The next is Fig and Farrow. Fig and Farrow, sorry, is an entirely plant-based comfort food restaurant. Do we have a representative from them? It's an entirely plant-based comfort food restaurant. The restaurant is dedicated to teaching customers about climate change and greenhouse gas emissions benefits that come from eating a more plant-based diet. According to the book Drawdown, put together by the world's top experts examining all of the top strategies to fight climate change, eating a plant-based diet is the #1 strategy in the fight to save our planet. As part of their climate-friendly mission, the restaurant took steps to reduce their own low-carbon footprint by replacing old, energy-inefficient lighting with new LED lighting, along with enhanced controls. So thank you to Fig and Farrow. Next up is solar. So we'll highlight a nonprofit, for-profit, and small business again. The nonprofit is Urban Ventures. 1:30 on a Monday after a snowstorm, I think, is a tough time to get here. So, Urban Ventures is a nonprofit in South Minneapolis with the goal of preparing children in their neighborhood for college and post-secondary education through a variety of educational, recreation, after-school, and family support programs. In 2018, they applied for funding for a 20 kW solar array. The installation of the solar system provides cost savings and state incentives, which can be diverted towards their core programming. Next up is Wellington Management. Oh, great. Wellington Management is a local property development and management company based out of St. Paul. I don't know how that got in here. They own their own and manage over 100 properties across the metro area, including the Greenway office building, one of the city's first LEED certified buildings. So they have a lot of chances to make an impact here in our communities. Last year, they undertook a series of energy-saving projects at their High Lake Shopping Center near Lake Street in the green zones, including an 80 kW solar array consisting of over 222 solar modules. The installation of the solar system will reduce maintenance costs that will be passed on to clients and tenants. Thank you for the work that you do, and I assume we'll be doing some other projects with you as well, so thank you. Small business for solar, the Mississippi Mushrooms. Located in the city's north side green zone along the Upper Harbor Terminal, Mississippi Mushrooms stands out as an example of a business focused on sustainability. Last year, in addition to the multiple energy efficiency projects, they installed a 10 kW solar system on the corner of their production warehouse to lower their carbon footprint of their production. They also have plans to expand the solar, have been looking at expanding the solar array as a result of their initial success. In addition to many other sustainable initiatives they are taking at their business, from waste reuse of local brewers' grains, eliminating any presence of any toxic chemicals in their production process. They're doing a lot around sustainability, and it's part of their core mission. So thank you for the work that you do here in Minneapolis. In 2018, the city started a pilot for the 4D Housing Incentive Program as part of a larger initiative to address the city's affordable housing shortage. This is the 4D program is a tax incentive program that gives tax incentives for building owners of multifamily buildings who commit to at least 10 years of affordability in their building. And so when those building owners commit to 10 years of affordability, we come on the back end and work with them on doing deep energy efficiency retrogrades. And then this year we'll be doing some solar projects as well on all of those projects. And so that more of those benefits of climate change can be passed on to the folks that are in those buildings. And Ron Hendrickson, as one of the first participants in the 4D Energy Efficiency Program, Ron and his wife replaced an existing 50-year-old efficiency boiler and a 27-year-old water heater with high-efficiency condensing boilers and high-efficiency water heaters. Additionally, Ron made lighting upgrades, air sealing, and weatherization stripping while going through the Excel's Energy's multifamily building energy efficiency program. I think I got another energy in there. Further reducing the tenants' energy bills. Overall, these upgrades are estimated to result in $25,000 in energy savings in the buildings that the tenants will benefit from. So thank you, Ron. Thank you. And then Beth Barron and Dean Bona, who also received awards, are not here today, but we will get their awards to them. And the last award for innovative pollution reduction goes to, so each year the Green Cost Share Program aims to provide financial assistance to organizations undertaking innovative pollution reduction projects. These projects have immediate positive impacts on our local air quality. We are recognizing this year's highest pollution reduction project, Broadway Resource Recovery. Oh, good. Hey, how are you doing? Hi. Broadway Resource Recovery is a local materials handler and recycler located in the city's north side green zone. Last year, Broadway replaced a diesel excavator with an electric material handler. This upgrade is estimated to reduce 5,000 pounds of combined fine particulates, VOCs, and NOx emissions, so harmful air pollutants, and 154,000 pounds of greenhouse gas emissions annually. The project was so successful in 2018, Broadway has applied to replace their second excavator with an electric model as well as replacing some of their diesel vehicles at the property. Diesel, we always love to see diesel emission reductions. It's some of the most harmful air pollution we have in the city, and it's in one of the, those reductions are happening in the best neighborhood that they could happen in North Minneapolis, so thank you for the work that you guys are doing in upgrading all of your equipment up there. So thank you. I think we're out of time. I just want to take a special shout out to Ahmed, Sydney, Nadia, Isaac, who keep this Green Cost Share train running on time, and to Gretchen for laying the tracks of that train as we move along. I'm truly grateful to be working with and for all of you here in delivering this program. Thank you.
Do you want me to do the whole thing?
I do believe we also have a proclamation. So if you want to
We do. Thank you. Did you want me to read it? Or?
Please, by all means.
Okay. So this is a mayor's proclamation. Whereas the Green Cost Share program started in 2012 has played an integral part in helping nonprofits, small business, and residents to facilitate energy efficiency, solar energy, pollution reduction projects across the city of Minneapolis, and whereas the City Cost Share program is a powerful tool that can be used to help the city of Minneapolis reach its ambitious climate change, energy, and air pollution reduction goals, and whereas the Green Cost Share program empowers the people of Minneapolis to lead on-the-ground solutions to climate change and reduce the negative health impacts of poor air quality, and whereas through the Green Cost Share program of Minneapolis, which works alongside people with real matching investments in their work, and whereas the Green Cost Share program is an intentional investment tool to reinvest in our communities that have been historically and intentionally underinvested in, And whereas the Green Cost Share Program focuses on equity and environmental justice, providing higher project matches and higher prioritization of funding for projects in our city's green zones, along with our cultural corridors and great streets, and in our affordable housing projects. And whereas the Green Cost Share Program has helped clean energy and pollution reducing projects move forward at over 340 small businesses, nonprofits, and homes. And whereas the Green Cost Share Program has eliminated the use of PERC, I'll say it that way, in all dry cleaning operations to be the first PERC-free city in the United States. And whereas the Green Cost Share Program has lowered energy bills for over 900 low-income residents and has reduced over 1,000 pounds of criteria pollutants that are harmful to people's health, the equivalent of taking 2,500 cars off of our streets. And whereas the Green Cost Share Program projects are generating over $40 million in wealth in our communities through solar production and energy savings. And whereas the Green Cost Share Program is one significant and scalable solution to our climate crisis that cuts emissions and builds wealth in our communities, especially our most overburdened. Now, therefore, I, Jacob Fry, Mayor of Minneapolis, do hereby proclaim December 2nd, 2019 as Green Cost Share Day in the city of Minneapolis.
Thank you all so much for that. This program is truly amazing, and the amount of work that is done and the level of impact that is created as a result of it is truly amazing. So thank you so much to the leadership of Patrick as well as Commissioner Musicant, and thank you for everyone who has participated in the program and utilized the resource that's available. With that, I would like to make a motion to receive the presentation on the 2019 Green Business Awards to recognize businesses, organizations, individuals, and our partners for fighting climate change and committing to the health of the people of Minneapolis. All those in approval, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and that item carries. Next, colleagues, we shall go to the consent agenda, which starts on item number 5. So item number 5 is referring to staff an ordinance amending Title 16, Chapter 423 of the Minneapolis Code of Ordinances related to planning and development, adding there 2 provisions relating to the applicability of the small and underutilized business program to amendments of city contracts. Item number 6 is passage of a resolution accepting a donation of travel and lodges. Item number 7 is a gift acceptance from the Annie E. Casey Foundation for travel and lodging expenses. Item number 8 is going to be referred back to staff for further action. Item number 9 is approving city council reappointments of Dana Frank, Joanne Hager, Madeline Lohman, Veronica Mendez-Moore, and May Brooks. Approving the council reappointment of Wade Lundberg. Confirming the mayoral reappointments of Brian Elliott, James Rauder, and Kate Davenport, as well as waiving the residency requirement for Kate Davenport. Item number 10 on the consent agenda is approving homegrown Minneapolis Food Council appointments. So we have the council appointments of Melissa Anderson, Marcus Carr, and Nolan Green, as well as the reappointments of Alyssa Banks, Andrea Eager, Jason Walker, Teresa Ophium, Latasha Powell, as well as the mayoral appointments of Aiden Reed and Ibrahim Mohammed, and the mayoral reappointments of Beth Dooley, Devon Nolan, Sega Tamane, as well as Emily Minge and Amy Moss. and then waiving the residency requirements for Sega and Alyssa. With that, colleagues, I will move approval of items 5 through 10. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and that item carries. Now we will move back to item number 2 for our public hearing. We have 3 public hearings. The first is going to be are we having just to clarify, because this is returning to author. Are we still good?
Yes, we still need a public hearing.
Okay, cool. So we will be having a public hearing, sorry for that, on the invasive tree species ordinances. Then we'll have the environmental program fee ordinance, followed by Minneapolis Commission on Civil Rights appointments.
Returning 12 and requesting 15.
All right, so under item number 2, we will be returning to author the amended, the ordinance amending Title 12, but we will be passing, hopefully, passing the ordinance amending Title 15. So do we have a presentation on this today? Welcome back, Mr. Hamlin.
Hello. All right, again, my name is Patrick Hamlin. I'm the Director of Environmental Programs. Here to talk about the Emerald Ash Borer Ordinance. And then I also just want to recognize Andra Bosniak for the Interagency Coordinator with Regulatory Services for helping put this all together. So this is amending Title 15, Chapter 399 of Minneapolis Code of Ordinances relating to the control of invasive species and tree pests. This is a voluntary tax assessment. This change grants the city the authority to assess the costs of a proactive and voluntary removal at the request of a property owner on a private property for ash trees that may or may not be visibly infested with an ash borer, but which can reasonably be assumed will die. The ordinance does not take effect until a funding source is determined, but we need to pass this ordinance first before we go through that process of whether that's bonding or a budget process or whatever that is. We need to bring this forward first. So the current plan is April of 2021 for a pilot and a report back to council. The rationale behind this is there's as close to 100% mortality rate with emerald ash borer. It will likely affect 100% of the city's more than 200,000, sorry, there's a typo in there, 200,000 ash trees on private properties. That includes commercial, industrial, and residential. It's estimated that's at about 11 years from the first outbreak of the typical path of the ash borer. We are approximately 10 years into this outbreak, so it's 11 years when you typically see from other cities where it's gone through, other areas where it's gone through, where you see total mortality. We seem to have pushed that timeline back, and it might be the result of our cold winters here that has pushed that back a little bit. This is within existing authority and structure. On private property, the city has the legal authority to remove hazardous trees, while the park board has the authority to remove infested trees. This is proactive. This is an ordinance that adds proactive capacity to mitigate an emergency scenario where tens of thousands of these ash trees are going to be coming down at the same time and becoming a hazard all at once. So this would create a shortage of contractors, and it would also be overwhelming on city staff in responding to hazardous tree conditions at rental properties and other properties around the city. This is also to help with manageable costs. So it's a tax assessment that will allow property owners the opportunity to spread out the costs of a removal over an extended period of time. And the costs for the removal typically range from $1,000 to $5,000. It can go as high as $10,000 if there's cases where it's overhanging a house or it's overhanging power lines and it's a difficult situation. So it gives property owners the ability to spread that cost out. Implementations, so we have seasonal environmental inspectors working in partnership with the park board that will identify potential trees and work with communities on outreach so that they even know if they have an ash tree on their property. So it would be an outreach program, and then Minneapolis, all Minneapolis residents would be eligible. There would be a focus again in the green zone, so that's how we'd be addressing some of the equity components of this program, is doing intentional outreach in those communities to make sure that people are aware of this program and the fact that they have an ash tree on their property. Regulatory services will contract arborists with arborists and oversee the tree removal process as they currently do, and submit assessments to the county as they also currently do. So this is one example of an ash tree survey. We actually went out and just wanted to get an idea of where the ash borer infections were around the city. So we did some outreach with our seasonal techs, and they actually cover a pretty big area of the city in their inspections. But what we found was that it's everywhere. There were cases of ash borer in every neighborhood that we went to, and it was quite prolific. So the pilot program, again, that would not be till 2021 as we're planning it now, would be the first year of the pilot and would be voluntary assessments of 100 trees, working at a small program in the very beginning just so that staff can get a better understanding of the usage of data and getting the whole program coordinated, and then scaling up or working up from there. The city will experience amplified service levels in the future due to the large amounts of hazardous trees on private property. And then we'll report back to both the Tree Advisory Committee and Council on the results of that program. And that's all I had at this time. And
Great.
we'll wait if you have questions.
Yes, are there any questions on the presentation? Councilmember or Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Cunningham and Mr. Hamlin. I'm just curious, is there any possibility for recycled use of these trees once they are brought down?
Chair Cunningham, Councilmember Jenkins. Yeah, there's a number of beneficial uses of the trees when they come down, composting, and then there's also a technology that we're looking at that's widely used in Stockholm, and Councilmember Schrader is a big proponent of it here, is biochar. Yeah, and it's a way that we can sequester, everyone's a big proponent of it. It's a way to sequester carbon in our soils for between 2,000 and 3,000 years, and then it's also beneficial for soils in the city of Minneapolis. So yeah, we are looking at that as a potential source, and we'd love to be able to incorporate that work in with this initiative.
Are there any other questions related to the presentation? All right, seeing none, thank you so much. Is there anyone signed up to speak? All right, well, I'll go ahead and open up the public hearing on item number 2 around the invasive species ordinance. If anybody is interested in speaking, you can go ahead and come up to the microphone now. Anyone? Anyone? All right, seeing none, I will go ahead and close the public hearing. No, that's okay. There's other opportunities to speak on other interests. All right, I have a question or comment from Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you very much. I certainly want to move this forward for approval. I also want to pass staff direction or have it considered by the committee, and there's copies of it there. There was one individual who did contact me by telephone and then sent me an email, and I'll make sure to forward that for the public record as well. He is in the business of tree removal, and he was just curious about what's the process going to be, how are we going to select the contractors, is the payment going to work, because right now there is a system in place for trees that are condemned that has some hurdles. So this staff direction is just kind of reassuring all of us that we're going to work on some of those details. I'll just read it for everybody who doesn't have a copy. It says, directing health regulatory services, licensing, and finance and property services staff to create an implementation plan for the invasive tree species ordinance with input from stakeholders, including licensed tree servicing companies, including piloting the program in 2020 with full implementation in 2021, creating a mechanism to sustainably finance proactive ash tree removal and replacement on private property without relying on existing departmental operating budgets, focusing on equity by targeting outreach to green zones, and expanding the pool of licensed tree servicing companies that can contract with the city to perform this work. This has been reviewed by staff and is basically in alignment with the implementation plan we were already going to be pursuing, but I wanted to make sure that it was on the record for us today. So I'll move approval of the ordinance and the staff direction if we can take those both together.
Great, thank you. So we have a motion on the floor for the approval of item 2.2 and also the staff direction. Do we also need to approve 2.1?
Oh, yeah.
I would, okay. So I will add to the amendment for us to approve. I move approval of item number 2, returning to author the ordinance amending Title 12 and passage of the ordinance amending Title 15, as well as the staff direction as read by Councilmember Gordon. Are there any questions or comments from my colleagues on these 2 items? Okay. All right, seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Say, and those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, that item carries. Great. Moving on to item number 3, we have passage of an ordinance amending Title 3 of the Minneapolis Code of Ordinances to centrally locate existing environmental fees and adding various provisions to reference the new chapter update to ensure compliance with state law changes and for accuracy and clarity. And then 3.2 is passage of ordinance amending Title 15 of the Minneapolis Code of Ordinances offenses related to noise, amending provisions to reference proper location of fees for existing permit types within the code. And it's those 2 sub-items. Do we have a presentation on this item? Welcome. If you could please introduce yourself for the record, that would be great.
Just reading the directions here. Move forward and speaking to the microphone. Okay. Tom Frame with the City of Minneapolis Health Department, Environmental Programs, one of Patrick Hanlon's employees. We are requesting passage of a new chapter 45 and some amendments to other chapters in Title 3 and amendment of chapter 389 in Title 15 as a result of earlier action taken this year by the council amending Title 5, Chapter 91, which involved the environmental director's fees. Those fees included our, I'll call them permit fees regarding tanks, wells, after-hours work, amplified sound permits for outdoor events, and the work that was done remove those fees from that director's fee schedule. We're requesting now to create the new ordinance, Chapter 45, and amending the subsequent ordinances so that they reflect 245, that these program permit fees are now would be part of an environmental program fee schedule. Also in the ordinance amendment, there's a couple items in Chapter 48 regarding the city's well program. The state of Minnesota over the last couple of years have made some amendments to monitoring wells, environmental borings, and we are just amending the city ordinance to more correctly reflect those state changes. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Do any of my colleagues have any questions related to the presentation? All right, seeing none, thank you so much. I will now open the public hearing related to the environmental program fees ordinance. Is there anyone who has signed up? If anybody is interested in speaking on this ordinance, you are welcome to come to the podium. Anyone? Anyone? All right, seeing none, I will close the public hearing and move approval of this item. Are there any questions or comments from my colleagues? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. 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 Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and that item carries. Item number 4, our last item in the public hearing before we move on to the discussion items. Item number 4 is approving the Minneapolis Commission on Civil Rights appointments. And we have a presentation from Mr. Frank Reed, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. One moment. Thank you, Shanae. My name is Frank Reed. I'm from the Civil Rights Department. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to put forward our proposed list of civil rights commissioners. Each was closely scrutinized and completely vetted. I was able to confer with the city attorney's office to make sure that we were in compliance with the ordinance, and I got the thumbs up from them. With that said, Chapter 141 of the Minneapolis Code requires there to be 21 seated commissioners, commission, 6 to 8 of which must be attorneys. Today we're requesting 6 new commissioners be appointed and additional 4 be reappointed. This will bring the commission to full compliance with 21 commissioners and 8 attorney members to help commission do its work. With that, the names of the suggested appointees are, and I will give a little bit of their background too as I proceed. David Farrar is a trained psychologist. Currently he works with organizations which provide services to homeless and people with disabilities. Lee Linderman is a lawyer who has worked as a civil litigator in the past and is also an aspiring writer. Kesa Megan works for the Minnesota Judicial Branch as a bilingual specialist, fluent in Somali. Janelle Shoemake holds an LLM in Human Rights Law and a Master's in International Development Practice. Jared Widseth is a lawyer by trade. He volunteers time with the Immigration Law Center. Paranaz Kasemi is a freelance writer working with Hamlin University. She is also pursuing a master's in teaching English as a second language. Kate Stevens is a trained lawyer. She is a facilitator of advancing racial equity for the Hennepin County Department of Community Corrections and Rehabilitation. Bennett Hartz is a consumer rights attorney. He volunteers with the Volunteer Lawyers Network, where he focuses on housing law matters. Cindy Lord works in marketing for Ameriprise, and she volunteers time with YouthLink, an organization that serves homeless youth. And finally, Cindy Devenish possesses a master's in management and serves as a corrections officer for Ramsey County. As you can see, they're a very interesting group of folks, really interested in working with them. I think we'll get a lot done in the coming years. If there are any questions, I would happily stand for them.
Are there any questions on the presentation? All right, seeing none, thank you so much for that. And thank you for that additional information. We're always very grateful to have such experienced, committed folks taking time to volunteer on behalf of the city. So I really am grateful to be able to raise and praise them in gratitude. So I will go ahead now and open the public hearing on item number 4 on today's agenda. Is there anyone signed up to speak? Is there anyone interested in speaking? Anyone? Anyone? All right, seeing none, I will go ahead and close the public hearing and move approval of this item. Are there any questions or comments from my colleagues? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and that item is carried. Hooray. Now we are moving on to the discussion items. Like I said, jam-packed, action-filled. So next up, we have receiving and filing the annual report from the Transgender Equity Council. I do believe Track, Hunter, and Shore will be giving the presentation today. So if you could introduce yourself for the public record, that would be appreciated.
Good afternoon, Chair Cunningham, Council Vice President Jenkins, and committee members. Thank you so much for having us here. My name is Shore, like the North Shore. My pronouns are they, them, their, or my name, and I am one of the co-chairs of the Trans Equity Council here at the City of Minneapolis. I'm also work for the Center for Health Equity at the State Health Department, the Minnesota Department of Health, and consistently am centering racial equity, trans equity, gender equity in my work, and I'm so grateful for the honor of serving on this commission. And I'm going to let Hunter introduce himself now.
Good afternoon. I am Hunter Williams. I am the co-chair of the Trans Equity Council with Shore. Been a member now for 3 years, and I've had a chance to really work with the committee, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to speak today. And my pronouns are he, him. So the work that the Transgender Equity Council does is to look at what's happening within our communities. When we look at transgender and gender nonconforming people, as we're studying this out in the public for the last several years, we notice that there is some more recognition of our presence, but the problems that our community faces continue. So even with some of the experiences that we've done to improve the situation, it's still problematic. If you look at the statistics that we've got, we are dealing with transgender people have more likely than the average American to live in poverty, experience discrimination, be unemployed, face homelessness, to be the victims of a crime, to lack access to health care, to take their own lives too. You can see the statistics on the presentation today and sort of the comparison from 2015 to 2018. That's that. One of the things that we want to talk about today are some of the accomplishments that we have done in the last several years. We've had 2 listening sessions where we've had a chance to increase our outreach. And in 2019, we appointed a new round of committee members. We've been building our priorities, our subcommittees based on the intersection of that work and the work that has been done up till now and the new voices on our committee. So we're just in a revision time. But with those new committee members in the past 6 months, we've been able to reestablish or establish several subcommittees. One is focused internally on gender inclusivity training for the City of Minneapolis, for city employees here. The next committee is focused on TEC bylaws, procedures, and the third is focused on public awareness and community engagement, just to make sure that TEC is out there in the local community and that we're building relationships with existing community leaders and made sure that we're moving towards public awareness that highlights the experience of the trans community in Minneapolis and also works with the anti-trafficking work in the coordinator's office. The members of our committee did facilitate a community discussion and listening session. We had 2 of them last year. The 6th Annual Transgender Equity Summit in September hosted one. The second was at the Pillsbury House Theater in South Minneapolis, and that was in November. And those were co-sponsored by the Minnesota Transgender Health Coalition and Reclaim. We plan to hold more listening sessions at other community events in the future. Also, for the first time, we tabled at Twin Cities Pride and had a staff person at Minnesota People of Color Pride and at the Walker Arts Center's events. Good. The Terrace Thursday Ball. And we worked with Outfront. We're trying to build relationships with other interested community members, trying to collect more feedback. We're using the feedback that we have to work in real time, because trying to create that public awareness campaign. We're also strengthening some of those relationships that we have internally and externally. We've heard, or will be hearing, some presentations to the Office of Civil Rights, the Office of Immigration and Refugee Affairs, SHU-News Anti-Trafficking Initiative, the Conversion Therapy Ban Work Group will be presenting to them, and several more that basically give us an opportunity to speak about what it is that we do to them. We're working with MTHC, the Minnesota Transgender Health Coalition, Outfront, and other community partners in those presentations. The staffer that we have has been a great resource in helping us develop those relationships, internal and external partners. They've been able to develop presentations and long-term partnership opportunities because we have that staff person. And over the last few months, we've been doing testimony, public hearings, and we are looking for more budget items for that staff person. And now let's summarize our recommendations to the council. The first is to have 2 full-time staff positions. We've had quite a bit of turnover in that staff position, and what we're looking for in order to enact all of our initiatives is to have full-time staff positions that are long-term and able to serve the needs of the committee. And they're serving, as we said, internal and external partners, so we need to make sure that we have a lot of training available for both the people working for the city and those people out there in the community too. We're also looking for more efforts on public housing and awareness and community engagement. And well, I think at that point, that's the last one that I have. Oh yeah, more housing, and now I'm going to turn it over to Shore.
Wonderful. With our remaining time, I'm just going to go a little bit deeper into some of those recommendations and some of the issues that the council has noticed. Related to training recommendations, we know that the city has the power to drive education around trans equity, not only just internally, but using the city's grant making and contracting power to ensure that non-public employees are trans inclusive. So the bullet points on the training recommendation screen kind of outline some of the things that we would like to continue to work towards. The first one being requiring that all city employees participate in trans inclusion training within their division or department annually. Human Resources has already rolled out gender inclusivity training that has been piloted in some departments and has gotten incredibly positive reviews, which is awesome, and we're super excited about that. And there's already been budget set aside to continue rolling out these trainings. Second, we would love to include training and inclusion requirements in all city grants and contracts. We hope that the Trans Equity Council can be used as a resource as the city continues to form requests for proposals related to trans equity work and other equity work as well. And we also envision this as a budget neutral step. Third, we would love the city to continue to use its role as an inspector and enforcer to tackle some of the practical applications of city policy. For example, ensuring that businesses that are open to the public aren't policing gender usage or policing bathroom usage by gender, as we know that 1 in 10 trans Minnesotans have been denied access to bathroom usage within the last year, according to local research. And the fourth recommendation related to training is to continue to invest in city facilities that reflect the communities, reflect our communities, trans and gender expansive communities, which entails converting and continuing to convert more gendered bathrooms into gender neutral facilities. And we know this is in progress, and we are excited to see this work continue. Related to public awareness and community engagement recommendations, I think Hunter really did a great job summarizing some of this, but we know that the city plays a major role in communications, inclusion, and training on many different levels. We would love to see a public awareness or media campaign that really highlights trans, gender nonconforming, and gender expansive community members. We've been looking at campaigns like they've done in Vancouver and Washington, D.C. That have really been about public awareness and education. And we've been working with the city coordinator's office to look into how to partner to create this type of campaign. And so this is something that we're very excited to continue working on. Secondly, we would love for the city to continue to incorporate images of trans and gender nonconforming folks into everyday city publications. Again, we envision this being a budget neutral component of what's already happening in the current communications work. And third, the council would love to continue exploring how to elevate community priorities. So that ranges from things like supporting something like a trans, queer, LGBTQ community space to center can provide resources, how to highlight equitable healthcare options and community connections and spaces for folks to connect. And lastly, we wanted to reiterate, again, some of the priorities that we put forth about housing. Housing is one of the largest crises that's facing our city today, the lack of affordable housing, and this is especially true in transgender communities as well. In the 2015 U.S. Transgender survey, as Hunter mentioned earlier, that survey mentioned that 30% of Minnesotans that are trans and gender nonconforming experience homelessness, and that 1 in 10 of those people experience homelessness due to gender discrimination. So this is a really important issue for us that we want to continue working towards. One of the things that we'd love to see is the city working towards creating a network of partners, of local landlords who are committed to non-discrimination in housing. Very closely linked to that, implementing a standards of inclusion for homeless shelters, and also mandating that staff in those spaces are required to be trained on trans inclusion and best practices. And third, ensuring that non-discrimination and anti-discrimination protections in accommodations such as shelters and rentals are as strong as possible due to these disparities. That was a lot. I know I talked fast, and I'm so grateful to be here and for your time. Thank you so much for having us, for supporting this work. And Hunter and I are open to questions, your thoughts, or reflections today. Thank you all so much.
Great, thank you so much. Are there any questions or comments from my colleagues? Well, not seeing any, I will go ahead and say that I'm really grateful for all the work that you do with the Transgender Equity Council. When we try to create new systems and create new space within institutions that have historically been halls of power that have excluded us on purpose, I say us for folks who don't know, I am also trans, that have been historically exclusive of us, to create new space and co-create that with community has been a challenging process because it's really uncharted territory. And so I'm grateful for the resilience and for the tenacity of members to ride this out with us as we try to figure out how to do something differently, how to build power differently, and to think about how do we move beyond advising, but how do we build power together? Thinking about it more as horizontal organizing rather than top down. And so I'm very grateful to you all. Minneapolis is a special city in that we have not one, but 2 trans council members. We are the only trans caucus anywhere in the world here in Minneapolis, so that's pretty cool. And so we just have a real opportunity with the wonderful foundation that Council Vice President Jenkins has laid for us and for the work that I was able to carry on after she went on to the cool work she did with the Trans Oral History Project. We really have the opportunity to show the rest of the country, if not the world, really what does it look like to have a radically inclusive society for trans folks who truly have an equitable opportunity to thrive and to navigate in public spaces safely, to be able to enjoy public accommodations safely, and to do more than survive but to thrive. So with that, I just want to say thank you again, and I have Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Cunningham. And thanks, TEC, for that presentation. I'm curious, what is the vision of a public awareness campaign? If you can just highlight a few of the things that you vision.
I'll take that. Some of the vision that we have in terms of a public awareness campaign would be just the idea of being visible, recognizing of the transgender community, and particular something that we can do that addresses transgender youth resources. And as a deaf person, when I think about transgender people with disabilities who are deaf or multilingual, what do we have in terms of accommodations and access that's comfortable for the trans community? Those are things that I can think of. Sure, what else?
Absolutely, and I think that there's a number of things that have come up, including one, how do we increase safety via visibility? And the second part being, how do we celebrate via visibility? And so I think that what we would hope to do is hold up both of those two things, as well as, introduce ourselves a little bit more deeply to the city, to our fellow Minneapolis folks, via a public awareness campaign, as well as create a sense of, we belong here, via public awareness as well. So again, hoping to increase safety as well as celebration of all the people who live in our communities. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
If I can add one more thing. We have had a lot of issues with transgendered people of color, particularly Black, experiencing crime, homicide, and I just don't know what we can do to be a little bit more brave about addressing that. It's just we need to be a little bit more overt about this particular safety issue for our community. We're screaming for it, and we're not seeing a lot of response.
And I can just add, I'm the staff for the TEC, that the subcommittee has also been talking about, in partnership with SUNY's anti-trafficking work, how do we create something that highlights what community members think will be most listened to, whether that's more through social media or more through kind of posters in bus shelters or something else like that. And so part of the efforts of the kind of community engagement part of that subcommittee are to determine what will actually have the farthest impact and be able to accomplish these goals. And so that's part of the question that's still in process right now.
Thank you. I am impressed by the recommendation to incorporate more trans and gender diverse identities within the city's current communication efforts. That seems to me to be a really positive and achievable strategy. So thanks for that recommendation.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from my colleagues? All right, seeing none, thank you all so much for taking the time. This was a really great presentation. We will take those recommendations very seriously and look into how we can possibly operationalize those. So thank you so much, and please send our thank you to the rest of the council members as well. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so yes. All right, so I would like to make a motion to receive and file the annual report from the Transgender Equity Council. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and that item carries. Moving on to our second discussion item, which is item number 12 on the agenda. We have passage of a resolution declaring that there is a climate emergency which demands a massive scale mobilization to halt, reverse, and address the consequences and causes of climate change. We have Kim Havey here, Director of Sustainability. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and council members. My name is Kim Havey. I'm the Director of Sustainability for the City of Minneapolis. I'm here to talk with you today about the key elements of declaring a climate emergency, why the city should declare a climate emergency, and what actions the city can take now once the climate emergency has been declared. So there's three key elements of declaring a climate emergency. One is for local officials like yourselves to pass an emergency resolution, as you have in your request for council action packet. Advocate as local elected officials and other leaders that we are in the midst of a climate emergency. This means talking with other elected officials from across various jurisdictions, as well as the state, the county, and other cities, as well as really working on mobilizing across leadership in our business and our public sectors. The third is to develop and implement policies and strategies locally at a sufficient scale, and I emphasize at a sufficient scale because we need to do a lot more now. We need to do more faster. So once we need to mobilize at a sufficient scale to achieve net zero energy emissions by 2030, but no later than 2050. The UN is indicating that we do need to reach that net zero emissions level by 2030 if we're able to stop some of the greatest impacts from climate change in the future. And we, as I mentioned earlier, need to mobilize both the public and the private sectors in this. It's absolutely essential that we have both sectors working hard at this effort. So as you know, I like to show this picture from 1972 of known as the blue marble, the first time ever the Earth was actually captured as a globe. And it shows this beautiful blue, green, white with clouds planet. But we are dramatically affecting the planet because of our emissions. We have a lot of research showing that evidence is there. The alarm bells are being sounded by more than 11,000 scientists recently that the impacts of climate change can be catastrophic. We have an obligation to really look out for this planet, to really look out for our youth, to really support the efforts the climate activists and others have done to really slow the emissions and to really make a change in climate. These are just a few headlines that have come out within the last few weeks, actually. Just on Sunday, the European Union, the day before the COP25 climate, UN climate summit in Madrid started, the European Union decided that it was actually essential to declare a climate emergency and to start looking at plans like a Green New Deal. I mentioned that more than 11,000 scientists have issued a warning on climate. We've had the fourth national climate assessment done, really looking at the impacts to our communities, the people, wildlife. And most recently, we've had reports, as the NPR story has said, and that we have given here to the council, that we've seen greenhouse gas emissions recently increasing. We are currently at a point where we are actually not even going to be leveling off the increase in emissions by 2030 unless drastic changes are made. So we are really here to have to walk the talk as a city and do everything we can to encourage others to participate in climate action. Currently, more than 900 jurisdictions in 18 countries worldwide have taken the first step in declaring a climate emergency. And this actually includes, in June 2019, the U.S. House of Representatives introducing a resolution with the support of 6 U.S. presidential candidates and including our own Senator Klobuchar, declaring a climate emergency is essential and we need to do more now. Locally, as our climate report in August indicated, we are experiencing warmer weather and higher emissions. This is actually a very unique graph that's done by Ed Hawkins, and it's called the warming stripes. It's specific to the 50 largest metropolitan areas in the United States. And what it shows that when you have a red bar, that's when the temperatures are hotter than average. When you have a blue bar, the temperatures are cooler than average. And as you can see, over the last 20 years, we have been experiencing much warmer than average temperatures. This is a fact that's seen very clearly in a graph like this. This is our own Minneapolis GHG emissions that we reported on earlier this year. And what we've seen is that while we've reduced emissions by 20% through 2017, we actually saw a slight increase in emissions in 2018. And this is really due to the fact that much of our building stock is not resilient to the impacts of cold weather or warm weather. We need more efficient buildings, better insulated, that can handle the changes that the climate change and the climate chaos is going to be incurring on our building stock and on the people who live here in Minneapolis. So we're not right now, if this trend continues, on track to achieve our 30% emissions goal by 2025, and certainly not our 80% emission reduction goal by 2050. So we need to do more. Much of our emissions are in the city of Minneapolis are coming from our built environment, from our buildings. Both electricity and natural gas in buildings amount to nearly 3/4 of our overall emissions. We've actually seen some good progress on emissions from on-road transportation going down, and we've been steady on wastewater and solid waste. So our focus really needs to be on our building stock, including our commercial, industrial, large multifamily buildings, as well as single family. It is a all-the-above strategy. So one of the things that, as all of us here know, many of the impacts that we've seen from environmental degradation have been borne by those who are least able to address it. We see this in the way that freeways have been developed, industry has been developed. We've seen it in the air quality, lead, asthma, many other indicators. And according to Dr. Robert Bullard and Dr. Beverly Wright, environmental and public health threats from natural and human-made disasters are not randomly distributed. So those who are least able to address climate change, who are been impacted the most, are actually ones that we need to be focused on as well. And that needs to be part of our climate emergency efforts. So we've got a great opportunity here to really change the way that we've been doing business from a very top-down approach to one that is building on community. This is a picture of folks that worked on the solar installation on top of Summit Academy in North Minneapolis, and it includes Councilmember Schrader and Councilmember Ellison and the mayor as well too. So these folks are all being trained to work in the green economy. So again, scaling up our efforts has a tremendous opportunity for us here in the city of Minneapolis to create wealth, and as Patrick Hamlin suggested with the green cost share, to really be able to create wealth through a new type of economy, one that's based on clean, renewable energy and investments in carbon-free types of industries. So for the sake of our children, our grandchildren, and future generations who will be the most affected by this, we need to take action now. These are actually some pictures of my family from this last Thanksgiving weekend. My two daughters, my husband, my nieces and nephews, and my niece who is there kind of sitting in the middle. She's actually pregnant with her first child. So it's a personal issue for me, and I know for all of you and many others, that these are the people that are going to have to clean up the mess unless we're able to get our act together and make this happen to be able to address climate change. We are a city that is known to be creative, innovative, tech-savvy, and committed to the people that live here. This is one thing that we need to do to show that we are committed to the future generations who are going to be living here in Minneapolis as well. So my recommendations for today is to declare the climate emergency, pass the resolution, to establish a social cost of carbon, which you'll be hearing about shortly from my colleague Luke Hollenkamp, to develop a sustainable building policy, which is also on our agenda today, to lobby and support our state legislative action to support an advanced building energy code, which will drive carbon neutrality for buildings by 2030, and to look for opportunities to accelerate climate change action throughout the city enterprise. I'd now like to ask Charles, Mina, and Sydney to come up and give a few words as part of the presentation and to introduce themselves. They'll just have a couple of minutes.
Welcome. If you can introduce yourself, that would be appreciated.
Hello, I am Sydney Murray. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm a student at the U of M. I'm representing Minnesota Climate Strike, part of the overall U.S. climate strike and youth strikes and the youth movement across the world. And, you know, as I speak, I want you to imagine all of these millions of people behind me, and I want you to feel our panic. I want you to feel our dismay, the hopelessness that we see in our future. It feels like a betrayal sometimes, which, you know, kind of sucks. And, you know, we've been told since forever that single actions from us are gonna make the big difference. However, by this point, we know that it's the fossil fuel industry plays a big part of this. And there was a study released in July of 2017 from the Carbon Disclosure Project saying that 100 fossil fuel corporations contributed to 91% of global industrial greenhouse gases in 2015, and 70% of all global greenhouse gas emissions in the Anthropocene, I think was the word they used. Which, I really don't have words for it. And, you know, there's all these studies coming out saying that, you know, oh, we have 10 years until 2030 to make the big change, but, you know, it has to start now. And I want you to feel the urgency that we feel. And, you know, if the climate emergency is declared today, it means nothing without action, without transparency and accountability. We're watching, we're seeing what you do, and we're acting upon it. And something that's also very important with, you know, if the emergency is declared, you know, I'm imagining that there will be more money in play. And I want you to consider reinvesting in communities that have been historically disenfranchised. I'm thinking about the green zones in particular. I think we need to think about decolonization and reparations for these communities. And thank you for listening. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Next up, welcome.
This one? Okay, cool. Hi, my name is Charles Frempong London Jr. I am here representing the Sierra Club North Star chapter in Seward, Minneapolis. I was actually called to testify about an hour ago, so I hope my voice doesn't crack when I get to this. But I think the important thing to remember, the thing that I have been thinking about in the past year as I've moved forward in my organizing career is thinking of the fact of oftentimes when we speak of the climate crisis, we think of it as this object that exists in the future. When the crisis has existed my entire life, it's not just a climate crisis, it is an environmental justice crisis. One that is perpetuated in environmental violence towards Black and brown people, and that was established when this land was colonized in the first place. So I encourage us to think, as we think of solutions for the crisis that we are currently in, that is one that acknowledges solutions that are centered in reparations and repairing harm that has been done I think we need to remember that the environment isn't something that's just out there. It's an active extension and a dynamic part of our everyday lives. It includes access to food, access to shelter, policing and accountability in our communities, the way that we interact with our friends and neighbors, and really thinking of it as a human-centric issue and problem that we need to address together as a collective community. And as we do that work, I was speaking outside there about being a sci-fi nerd and being really into the idea of the movie Black Panther. And that was a big moment in my life because after that movie came out, I had so many people coming to me telling me that they hadn't seen a representation of the future like that ever before. And in my mind, it just made so much sense as far as being like a fan of Afrofuturism, that this was just a perspective that was steeped in African culture. It was a perspective that was steeped in cultures that have been left marginalized from what we can envision for our futures. So I encourage us to expand our cultural expectations of what is possible and really think of transformative change. If our solutions are steeped in systems that have been used to regularly oppress us and systems that were designed to keep us marginalized, those solutions will do the same exact thing. Real change and real progress lies forth in what is the next iteration of what a system can be? What is the next iteration of what a movement can be? And so I'm happy and grateful to have this opportunity to speak in front of City Council, to speak amongst all these wonderful organizers, activists, and community members, and take that first step towards envisioning a future that is equitable for every Minnesotan. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Welcome. If you can introduce yourself, that'd be appreciated.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Mina Learwood, and I'm a mom, a Minneapolis Public Schools teacher, a Minnesotan American global citizen, and a member of Extinction Rebellion. The city of Minneapolis will no doubt declare a climate emergency. We will be joining California, New York, London, the EU as leaders in aligning our view with that of the United Nations and the U.S. National Climate Assessment, which just came out on Friday, declaring that the rising seas and extreme weather patterns experienced worldwide are a climate emergency. Scientists are predicting the destruction of hundreds of coastal cities, the dislocation of millions of people, and the extinction of thousands of animal and plant species. If this doesn't rank as an emergency, I don't know what does. Extinction Rebellion is active in 70 countries and U.S. cities and is a united global voice that has 4 demands. 1, tell the truth about the climate crisis. 2, fossil fuels to net zero by 2025. This is a number that scientists have chosen, saying that we have less than 10 years to halt the destruction of our shared atmosphere. 3, democracy fit for purpose. All people must be represented as we transition into this uncertain climate future. I've been very proud to stand with the 2 of you. Thank you so much. It's great to have such a diverse council, and I feel that we have a democracy in Minneapolis, and I'm going to continue to hold on to it and fight for it. Climate justice is number 4 for our people of color and our youth who face a disproportionate amount of the consequences of the climate catastrophe. I work with a lot of young people who are feeling despair and anger around climate issues. Young people have a right to be heard. Stand up and demand action from the powers that be. Action helping the environment is also helping ourselves. It is important to take care of ourselves, and it is important not to give up. The fight for Mother Earth is the mother of all fights, so named Artemisma Zachariaba, an indigenous climate youth activist. And you, the Minneapolis powers that be, what future are you giving to the next generation? What will be your lasting mark? Can you tell the truth? Please declare a climate emergency and then follow it up with the actions, such as a pesticide-free pollinator habitat, a carbon tax, solar power, reduced metro transit fares. Please get busy. We will be holding you accountable. We will be helping you. from the kindergartners on up.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Those powerful testimonies. Did you have anything else?
No, that concludes my presentation, and I'll stay for questions.
Great. Are there any questions or comments from my colleagues? Councilmember Cano.
I wanted to ask a question that just was floating throughout my head as I was listening to all these different speeches and testimonies, and thank you all for coming here, and good to see you, Charles. There's a lot of talk about the Green New Deal and how that could potentially gain a lot of steam over the next 12 months, and so depending on the outcome of the presidential election. Just curious if the city of Minneapolis has been able to plug into those efforts and kind of bring these voices together in a legislative manner to either shape that bill. I don't know quite the statuses of its introduction, but I know that certainly a lot of strong leaders throughout the country are talking about it, and just wanted to see what our connection is as a municipality to feed into that plan and make sure that we are aligning all these different efforts in government.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Cano, we have been watching very closely the work that's being done with the Green New Deal. I don't know if it actually is something that the legislative side with our legislative affairs director and others have really taken a position on at this point in time, but I think as part of this climate emergency and the work that we're doing, we need to take a look at both state and federal legislation. We certainly support the intent of the work that's there through our work on workforce, on equity, on renewable energy being developed, on our transforming of our economy away from fossil fuels to renewables. All those points of the Green New Deal line up very closely with the policies and the initiatives here at the City of Minneapolis. As far as us taking a position directly on what has been introduced, that I'd have to defer to our legislative team.
Okay, thank you. I would just encourage you to keep your advocacy up and to help us align with those efforts as much as possible to make sure that they speak to Minnesota or Minneapolis realities. So appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Council Vice President Jenkins, followed by Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you, Chair Cunningham and Mr. Havey, and all of the speakers who came and testified very passionately and deeply and I think accurately about the challenges that we face around climate. I had a couple of things as we, the city, think about meeting our goals. And I know your department, Mr. Havey, has been primarily tasked with this, but this work cuts across all of our departments and agencies throughout the city. And so I'm curious, how are you engaging other departments? For example, I mean, some of our goals around green jobs and creating the kinds of infrastructure to train and sort of repair some of the harm that has been done in our communities, particularly to communities of color. Programs intended to address that are being stalled in various areas of the city's departments. And I'm just curious, how is your department working to help identify some of those challenges, but then overcome those challenges with solutions, given the nature of a climate emergency? And then my next question would be, what does a declaration of climate emergency sort of commit the city to doing?
Mr. Chair, Council Vice President Jenkins, we do work across many different departments with Public Works on solid waste and the work that's happening on going towards our zero waste policy by 2025, at recycling. some of the other things like carry out bag ordinances, reduce our trash and to reduce the amount of waste that we have. We're working across our departments with CPED as well too. We did initiate a workforce study that was completed earlier this year, and we're working with our Energy Vision Advisory Committee and CPED, as well as staff from CPED on implementing those recommendations and looking for ways that we can implement those. We have taken resources that were dedicated from our increased franchise fee dollars to workforce development, and we do have a task force as part of both our Community Environmental Advisory Commission as well as our Energy Vision Advisory Commission, which are now meeting together to work on those components. We've also been very supportive of the work that the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission has been doing on equity and workforce inclusion. We've met with electrical labor union who represent several hundred employees at Xcel Energy to talk about how we can get more folks from Minneapolis involved in apprenticeship programs and STEM pathways to get into those jobs within the utility. We've worked very closely with the utilities through our Clean Energy Partnership as well too to focus on workforce. I can say we haven't made as much progress as I'd like to see. I think there isn't a silver bullet, and it's been a challenge to see that, other than in a few sort of spits and starts. We have a lot of data, but we do need to do more, and we need to make this part of some of our larger initiatives. Like, for example, I really want to make sure that we have a very good program available for as we're transitioning to our 100% renewable electric, in which the city may be acquiring additional renewable sources, that we are actually making sure that workforce goals are being met as part of the acquisition of these new energy sources and as we transition to a more carbon-free future. I think that we're very aligned across departments. I don't know if we necessarily all have the same strategies or ideas. We are committed to the overall goal, but I will say more work needs to be done.
And what specifically does a declaration of climate emergency commit the city enterprise and its residents to doing?
Councilmember Cunningham, Council Vice President Jenkins, the climate emergency declaration is what you make of it. We've recommended that we go to a social cost of carbon, which isn't currently being used by any other city in the state. It's really looking at what is the actual real societal and externality costs of carbon, and putting those into decision making, both when we're looking at whether we're buying a combustion engine or an electric engine vehicle as part of our fleet, how it's going into our building stock, and whether we're making decisions about doing something that maybe is slightly more efficient, a little more expensive, but it saves a lot on carbon, utilizing that social cost of carbon in there. So that's a major component of it. We're doing some very creative policies around our building policy, looking at, which we'll talk about in a little while, 4 major components of our work around economic development: 1 to 3 unit apartments, multifamily, and our own city enterprise buildings, ensuring that they are ultra efficient and resilient. So those are aspects that we're looking at. I'd like to also see us do an inventory of all the work that's being done in the city on climate change. I know there's a lot of departments doing a lot of different things, but it is not fully coordinated across the board. And I personally don't know exactly how much money or personnel has been invested in that. That's really important for us to be able to do. And I also think really being a leader and an advocate on this across the board, because the city of Minneapolis shares our atmosphere with everybody around us in the world, in our metropolitan area. And as a leader, we can bring many more cities and represent many more people if we're being a leader that can show we can actually make some actions happen on climate change. So just like with our legislative action, we've formed a coalition with 22 other cities representing 1.5 million people throughout the state to push for a more advanced building code, building energy performance standard. And that's going to drive tremendous amount of change, because it's going to drive innovation, it's going to reduce energy use, it's going to save money. And it's going to keep money circulating within our economy, unlike sending money outside the state as when we purchase fossil fuels. So the commitment that the city makes is really what they want to make of it. And I think it's really important for us to take the initial steps and then to be able to come back and report, here are some of the things that we can do both as a city and as policies that we can accelerate the action we're taking on climate change. So it's as much as you want to make of it situation, but we have a lot of opportunity here in Minneapolis to do more.
Thank you.
Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you. And I don't necessarily have any questions, but I did want to move the resolution forward and make a few comments. First, I really want to appreciate folks being here and also speaking up over the last few years on this topic and being organized and getting organized and coming forward. I don't think we'd be doing this if it wasn't for community involvement and pressure that we're feeling from outside City Hall to do more and take action, and from hearing from people that declaring this emergency is important, and it's an important step. And I appreciate that we'll make out of it what we will, but we'll make more out of it with the help from others. I mean, we have a lot of opportunity in the city of Minneapolis. I think we have a very sympathetic, climate-conscious staff, residents, council member, policymakers, and mayor. We want to be able to do the right thing. We're set up with advisory groups to help us figure out what to do. We have ideas coming forward all the time. And the more you can help put pressure on that as a whole is accountable, the better. We have a clean energy partnership, and I'll tell you that working with utilities is a challenge. Right now we're seeing the most emissions are coming from our natural gas company that right now has a monopoly in the city that isn't looking at alternatives for cleaner fuels and isn't feeling pressure to do so, but hasn't felt that much pressure. I guess they probably are feeling some pressure now, and they need to feel more. We have to figure out a way to heat our buildings without using fossil fuels, and that's going to be a challenge for us. And we need to get our heads around that, and we also need our experts in the utility businesses to get their heads around that, and we'll see what kind of pressure that we can mount. But we'll need help doing that, and we'll need help from the community, not only pushing back at us, but also pushing back at others. I mean, we're over at the state legislature wanting permission to have a higher standard for our building code. I mean, we had a local building code for decades and decades and decades. And then the building industry decided we need a one-size-fits-all for the state of Minnesota. And so they set the building code. So even if we all agreed, 100% of us, residents, policymakers, that we should have higher standards for energy efficiency, we couldn't put them in our own building code and enforce them right now. We're going to hopefully be heading towards sustainable building policy, but we only have leverage there right now if we have money in those buildings, and then we have the legal right to require more standards. We don't have a legal right to raise the standards right now because of the state legislature. So let's put pressure out there too. I loved the fact that my colleague brought up the Green New Deal, and why don't we say today, right now, this declaration is the first step so that next year, let's get to work and make a Minneapolis Green New Deal so that we can have it for our city and for our residents, and we can see how we can take all the great work we've done with our green zones and everything else in our clean energy partnership, and let's put that in a package. And if Green New Deal is what we should be calling it now, let's call it that, and let's move that forward, and I think that gives us a great opportunity. We even have an opportunity coming up in just a few days when we're going to be talking about our city budget. It looks like we probably put more energy into climate change issues last budget that we right now have set and earmarked for in this budget. I see a big sign over there that's naming some funding gap of, what was that again? Could we see that one sign? Fill 600,000 gap in city franchise fee equity budget for the climate. I think there is an issue there that we can work on. We have been working on it up here, and that's something that we can take action on right away, and hopefully we can do that too. And there's probably a lot more. Let's let ourselves get fired up and excited about this. Let's let ourselves believe that declaring this emergency is a big deal, because there seriously is a big emergency, and there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people desperate for us to do something because they don't see a bright signs for their future. So I really appreciate you coming and reminding us of that, and let's stay on this.
Thank you, Councilmember Gordon. Councilmember Schrader.
Of course, I have to follow Councilmember Gordon. I think just to push that a little bit further, on the point of we're going to make what we will of the resolution, I'm going to just want to be clear, we're going to make a lot out of it. There is a long way that we need to go. And I think that we are a leader in so many ways, but we really have to be. In this state, we need other cities to look toward us and see that it's possible, that there's a future that's more equitable, that's more fair, and that's more resilient, and they can just have to look to our city to see it. I'm really proud of the work this committee does, because I think too many times we talk about climate change like it's something we're just going to survive, instead of saying something is wrong with the way we live now. That it's not equitable, not everybody's voice is heard, and that needs to change. With an emergency, sometimes some of those things get left to the side, and I'm very proud of our city to say front and center, we need to make sure that this change is done in an equitable way, that this is the future that we all can believe in.
Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Cunningham. I just looking around the room, and I want to be clear. I am supportive of this effort. This is the planet we live on, and we have to make it habitable for all of us. However, I've been saying this for years and years and years. We must include people of color in this conversation. They are not being convinced that this is the issue of our day. We need to talk about it in different ways. We need to talk about it consistently. Not only talk about it, and I'm challenging you, the advocates, I'm challenging our departments to be more intentional, take more risk, be more creative about ways to include communities of color in this conversation. It has to happen. We cannot continue to just let this go on. And as was noted very early on, the people who are primarily impacted by this crisis are communities of color. And so figure out a way to get them engaged in this issue. Departments, I hope they are listening, figure out a way to make sure that people of color are involved in creating workforce and creating solar gardens in our communities, and in creating impervious surfaces, all the things. We must include people of color in these conversations.
Thank you, Council Vice President. Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I really want to thank the authors for their work on this, their leadership, our staff, and everyone in the room who's both here today, and all those that aren't here today that can't be with us. This is the issue of our time among many pressing, important issues. And it's so easy to get depressed or disheartened about it when you look around and see all of the inaction that is happening at a federal, at a global, at a corporate level. And what we really need is to see leadership at those levels, but we also need to see leadership at a local level. And the reality is that if every city stepped up and did their part around the world, and if everybody really took action on this, we'd get the changes that we need to avoid catastrophe. And so I'm proud to stand with my colleagues today in supporting this work and continuing our work and our leadership in the city. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, so we can't underestimate that and the investments and difficult choices that need to be made around that. But we have a responsibility to do that, because so much of what we enjoy today in Minneapolis is a result of forethought and intention from generations that came before us, and we need to make sure that we are living up to that standard that they've set forward for us, and making sure that we are leaving it better than we found it for the next generation. And that's work that didn't start here today but continues here today.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from my colleagues? Councilmember Bona? Okay, no, that's okay. So I will just add in closing that I'm really grateful for all of the work and the leadership of my colleagues and city staff and community members for continuing to carry this work forward. As somebody who represents an area that is historically and presently disenfranchised and disinvested in, a lot of times we are focused on survival, day-to-day survival. And so one of the things I really appreciate is being able to have support from community members, both within the community as well as outside the community, to help us build our capacity to be able to look beyond the survival of every day and to the survival of our species as other species, as a part of a larger ecosystem. Survival can really narrow one's focus and tunnel, and so I'm really grateful for this work as somebody who represents an area that is referenced a lot and has been referenced a lot today, so I'm grateful for that. One thing that so I have two questions. The first is, you talk about scaling up, so ideally these things would be at least a federal level, for us to be able to achieve the kind of scale that we really need. But if we're starting on the local level, what are we doing now to scale up across, let's say, Hennepin County or across the metro area?
Mr. Chair, I think what we're doing a lot is coordinating our efforts around public transit, coordinating our efforts around our advanced building performance standards. This is something that's fairly new and hasn't been done before. Really with looking at other cities as partners, looking at the county in a partnership. We're working with them actually on benchmarking buildings. The city has taken a lead on our truth and sale of housing, which we're going to be launching in January 15th. We hope to be able to spread that throughout the entire metro area so that everyone who is going to look at a home actually knows what they can do to make that home more energy efficient. But in regards to what we can do to scale up, that is going to scale up the number of homes that are going to go through energy evaluations from about 1,200 to hopefully over 6,000 from 2019 to 2020. But what we don't have is we don't have the investment dollars. Right now we have, for example, 0% financing for air sealing insulation, attic insulation, things of that nature, and helping to sort of electrify some of the appliances like a heat pump water heater. But our dollars that we have committed are quite inadequate to meet that. We can actually do maybe 150 loans. So if we're having 6,000 houses that are going to be looked at, it'd be great for us to be able to say that at least half of those homes and those homeowners could access our low-cost financing. And to do that, we're going to have to dramatically increase the commitment that we have to it. I know that in working very closely with Patrick Hamlin and the environmental programs area, that we are actually pretty much out of funding from the Green Business Cost Share by February 1st. And there's 2 rounds after that we could do. Now, sustainability through the franchise fee has made multi-million-dollar commitments. We did more last year than we've ever done before. But again, scaling that up, we have a lot more demand, and that's without even really advertising or promoting it at all. If we actually use social media, if we actually told or explained how people can take individual action, could really make a difference as far as scaling it up. But it is dollars, it is about awareness, it is about making coalitions and partnerships with other organizations. All of that, I think, can be scaled up because we've got a lot of great ideas. We have, in many cases, a roadmap for what we need to do to reduce our energy emissions by at least 30 to 50%. But it does take a lot of individual actions. We have, more than 90,000 premises in the city, 88,000 single-family homes. So we have to be able to create an awareness campaign, and the support and the incentive, I think, or the regulatory requirement to make the changes happen and as quickly as we need them to happen.
Great. As you do the citywide or the city enterprise landscape analysis around investments and programming and staff time, is conducted. I would be really intrigued to see what is being invested at the county level, like an actual full landscape analysis, because one of the challenges as well as a local jurisdiction is that we have to take the brunt of the financial burden for when federal government doesn't step up, when state government doesn't step up, when county doesn't step up, it falls on us, and we have to rely on largely property taxes in order to be able to meet those needs, and that's just an unsustainable approach to funding and addressing the challenges that are so grand that we can't, we're the last frontier. We have to deal with it because it has to be done. So I would be interested in a larger landscape analysis as that work is done. And then my last question that I have, one of the things that I really feel passionate about is interrupting the 6th mass extinction that we're living in right now. And so I'm curious, where does biodiversity fit into the work? Because I've heard a lot about, energy consumption and, whatnot, but where does habitat loss or, how are we protecting biodiversity or helping to replenish it in the city?
Well, that's a great question, Councilmember Cunningham. Right now, our focus has really been on creating more green space and looking at ways that we can actually use that as a way to sequester carbon, to be able to be more resilient when it comes to heavy rain events, for stormwater retention, to help purify our air, especially in downtown. But I'll be honest, it is not something that's specific to our existing climate action plan. And it probably should be. I will say, in an inner city as urban as Minneapolis is, it's not the first thing that you think of, but it's really important for all of us to do that. So this may be another opportunity now that this issue has come up and you've brought it up to really prioritize this and figure out what are the missing gaps from our climate action plan. I'd really like to be able to do an update to our climate action plan. We're in the process of adding to it with a food action plan right now, will be completed in June. And I'd like to see where we have other gaps, because I think we do have other gaps within that. One of which is we don't talk about how we want to achieve things through human-centered actions. So when you make a bus more comfortable, faster, efficient, cleaner, cheaper than any other modes of transportation, we're going to increase ridership. The same thing that we have with green space, and people are going to appreciate green space when it's accessible and it's clean and it's safe. So we support more green space and more carbon sequestration. And I think that can be said a lot about how we live, and living in an efficient homes and being very efficient is more comfortable. You don't have drafty windows. You don't have a clunky heating system. So we do have the ability to sort of refocus it so it looks forward in a positive way, rather than saying, okay, everybody's got to cut out what they're doing right now. And I think that's a need that we have within our existing climate action plan as well, too. So some of those things, such as preservation of wildlife habitat, are things that we have traditionally overlooked in the work that we've been doing in climate action within Minneapolis.
Yeah, I really feel like there's an opportunity there. We talk a lot about pollinators. We talk a lot about, there's just a lot of opportunity. I feel like for us to think about that as well as we're talking about climate is also biodiversity. So thank you for that. Sorry, I don't have a fancy speech like all my colleagues, so we'll leave it with that. Thank you for your work on this. Thank you to my colleagues. Thank you to city staff and all of the community members who have been so dedicated in this work. This is a good example of building an inside-outside strategy with folks who are advocates and allies within the city government, like my wonderful colleagues and the city staff, as well as folks on the ground, building that power together. So I think that this is really just a great example of that. So with that, was that fancy?
That was kind of fancy.
Thank you. Thank you. I will take it. All right. So we do have a motion on the floor to pass the resolution declaring that there is an climate emergency which demands a massive scale mobilization to halt, reverse, and address the consequences and causes of climate change. All those in approval, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and that item carries. Thank you, everyone. But don't go anywhere because we have 2 more items that are just as exciting. So next up, I'm excited about it. So next up, we have receiving and filing a report on related to establishing a social cost of carbon to use in climate and energy policy, and passing a resolution establishing a social cost of carbon use in climate and energy policy. Luke Hollenkamp, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Cunningham. Council members, I will try to be as exciting as my boss, although he's a tough act to follow. Again, here today to talk about social cost of carbon. So one of our first follow-up items to declaring a carbon emergency. There was, a few months back, a staff direction for staff from many different city departments to convene on this issue and to provide a recommendation back to the committee, and that's what we are here today. So the social cost of carbon, it's a very important subject because it is an element that addresses the seen but often unmonetized impacts of climate change. So the lack of progress in stopping our climate emergency really creates enormous societal costs. As you can see here from this image, and to the committee members' previous comments, a lot of these impacts are things actively being seen by the city. We're seeing these impacts and we're having to pay for these impacts as well. So a climate emergency is a recognition that there's enormous climate impacts, and those impacts have a cost. Those societal costs, again, are currently not being factored into the economic cost of greenhouse gas emissions. What this is, then, it creates an economic externality. And this is an economic externality that really must be addressed to effectively combat climate change. And this is a reality, an unfortunate reality that really scientists across the world recognize, something that must be taken into account. So one of the ways you can account for those externalities is by using the social cost of carbon. That is a commonly employed metric that is calculated by the scientific community regarding the expected long-term damage done by a ton of carbon dioxide in a particular given year. Another way to think about that is not just in terms of damages, but what is the societal benefit of foregoing a ton of carbon emissions. An example of how an organization would use the social cost of carbon is in something called shadow carbon pricing. This is where you can use it for internal accounting methodologies as well as decision-making practices. This is used by many different organizations really across the globe. It will measure their climate impact as well as manage their risk for future regulatory policy. It also is used increasingly by corporations that want to gauge what type of corporate citizen they are, as well as then, again, the risk that they have to climate change. An example is the city's fleet electric vehicle study performed in 2017. So the city has actually already used shadow carbon pricing in some of our analyses. In this particular study, potential payback periods for the purchase of electric vehicles were measured. And what was balanced was the premium capital cost of electric vehicle versus the annual fuel cost, or the annual fuel savings and the maintenance savings, and for the first time using the shadow carbon pricing, the carbon savings. So you're able to fully internalize now the savings by switching over to electric vehicles. And in this case, too, the electric vehicle study was founded on a social cost of carbon that had rigorous scientific evidence behind it. Namely, it was using dollar amounts per metric ton or per ton of carbon that were set by the Obama administration's EPA. Now, social cost of carbon is used internationally by many different national organizations, subnational organizations, as I mentioned, companies as well, too. And there is a large variety of dollars per ton that are put out there for what a social cost of carbon should be. It can range from some recent estimates. For instance, you maybe heard International Monetary Fund set $75 per ton of CO2. That's a number that they came up with if you had supporting policies to accompany a social cost of carbon, as well as if you don't have supporting policies. Essentially, if you rely on only an economic model to solve climate change, you need much higher prices. But there's a wide range of dollars, and to provide a recommendation to this committee, we wanted to really focus in on on estimates that have had a really rigorous stakeholder engagement process that were scientifically and economically valid, use the opinions, experience, and research of experts across the field. So where we looked first was federal agencies and how they've used social cost of carbon. In the Obama administration, there was a lot of progress made on this front. Prior to 2009, different federal agencies, similar to how maybe different city departments, were using a social cost of carbon in their different rulemaking analyses. However, this was not an ideal way for the federal government to be judging the impact of rules on regulations. So they intervened in an interagency working group, which had scientific and economic experts involved, to harmonize this range of values and to ensure that they were using the best available scientific information to establish a dollar per ton amount. This working group then in 2010 provided a set of estimates which were based on the year that emissions would take place. And this created a model that combined climate processes, economic growth, and then the interactions between the two, because it's a very complicated science. However, with this very, very rigorous process and the use of scientific experts as well as economic experts, they did create a very, very valid underpinning for the social cost of carbon they determined. And in fact, then they had a planned process to make improvements over the next few years. This is an example of the social cost of carbon that was adopted by the federal government, again, under the Obama administration. It goes without saying that these values have now been changed by the Trump administration. One thing you'll notice is that there's a different dollar assigned to a metric ton of carbon depending on what year it is emitted. It increases as we go over time because the impacts of climate change are more expensive as we go into the future and even more irreversible. It also then depends on in the economic field, the discount rate that is established. And I'll notice that in addition to different discount rates here, 5%, 3%, 2.5%, the federal government also had a high impact 3% 95th percentile. What that rate was, and you'll see that that is a much higher rate, that represents a lower probability but higher impact outcomes from climate change. So unlikely to happen impacts, but if they do, they are very, very large in terms of their impact. Another use of social cost of carbon has been by the Minnesota PUC. In 1994, many decades ago now, they first established social cost of carbon for weighing the economic externalities that we just discussed, the environmental costs, in their decision-making processes. And this was at the time specifically for electricity generation. A few decades later, and now a few years ago from now, they had about 4 years really intensive stakeholder process where they updated these social costs of carbon values that they had previously established in 1994. I mentioned that's very extensive, and it was a very broad range of stakeholders. You can see here the groups that are involved. There was environmental groups, the utilities, business interests, human health advocates, state agencies, the Minnesota's Office of the Attorney General, as well as the Administrative Law Judge. And at the end of that 4-year process, they adopted a range of social cost of carbon values that was actually largely based upon the Obama administration's values. They found that to be a very rigorous process, very scientifically sound, and because of that, with a few economic adjustments, they adopted that social cost of carbon as well. And this is an example of the table that they've produced. It looks very similar to the table that the Obama administration put out. What you'll notice is in 2020, they actually had a low value and a high value for social cost of carbon. And then in 2025, you can see that is increasing. And I just note that that is our next greenhouse gas emissions reduction year. At that year, it would be nearly $47 per ton of CO2. And then in 2050, which is our 80% GHG reduction year, the value rises to almost $70 per ton. And the high value in this column lines up very, very closely with the Obama administration's 3% discount rate value. So this is to show that there have been two very rigorous processes that have aligned themselves around this high value mark, which is that second column there. After looking at, again, a wide range of options really across the globe in terms of social cost of carbons, and then focusing in on what the federal government undertook during the Obama administration, and then what the Minnesota PUC recently adopted for their values. The staff from all the departments involved in this recent discussion are recommending that social cost of carbon be set to the high schedule of values adopted by the PUC. So for instance, that would be a little over $41 per ton of CO2 in 2019, and then increasing per that schedule previously shown. And furthermore, we had consensus that for internal city enterprise policy, that would be, again, shadow carbon pricing similar to the electric vehicle study, that we'd recommend the city use the high values adopted by the PUC, but then also that the analyses consider other values, for instance, what has recently been recommended by the International Monetary Fund, as well as that high risk, low probability level recommended by the Obama administration. This would provide the city with a range of potential values to consider, again, in their internal shadow carbon pricing conversations and analyses. So that's the recommendation of staff, and I am happy to answer any of your questions.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions or comments from my colleagues? Councilmember Gordon.
I just have a question, I guess, based on the way the resolution is written, and I'm not that familiar with PUC and how they operate, but is there a chance that they'll go back in and reevaluate this schedule?
There is a chance that they would go in and reevaluate this schedule. To my knowledge, there has not been they have not set up a process to intentionally do that. The values that have currently been adopted, I think were seen by many as a compromise values between the different organizations that were involved, again, that large list. So because of that, I don't see any of those organizations petitioning the PUC to re-examine this in the short term.
Okay, and so I guess my only thinking was if in the future sometime they adjusted their recommendations, it's unclear what our resolution is asking us to do, because we're kind of approving the schedule that they have right now to be our guidance, which I'm fine with, but I'm also aware that things could change dramatically and people could suddenly realize that costs are a lot higher than we originally understood. So I want us to be able to come back and reflect on it and be nimble, but I don't think we have to change anything now. I was mostly just curious.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from my colleagues? Council Vice President Jenkins.
Thank you, Chair Cunningham. So just for clarity, these costs would be incorporated into the cost of building permits, or when will these costs be sort of added and or collected?
Chair Cunningham, Council Vice President Jenkins, this recommendation and this resolution being brought forward by Councilmember Gordon Schrader does not currently set the exact method in which the social cost of carbon should be applied. I see that as the next step to this process, although it's a very valuable step. I bring up the shadow cost of carbon as an example of one of those ways that this could be applied for the city's enterprise operations. I think that is, when you spoke of aligning departments across the city in their climate change efforts, I think this will go a long way in aligning departments so that whether it's a study on electric vehicles or a study on a new municipal office building projects or other infrastructure projects that use energy, those studies and those analyses will then all use the same number. But as for, and I think that will be one of the possible items to be included in the next agenda item, which is the sustainable building policy. I think this would easily fit into that process as well. But I think that those policies will still be developed. And I would defer to the council members if they had any thoughts on that too.
Councilmember Gordon or Schrader, did you want to respond to that?
I'll go quick. Yeah, just to respond to that, that's an excellent question. It really, I think, this is really the first step and just the beginning. What I hear from people most of the times, they just don't know what they can do. And this will put a very clear dollar amount and more of an awareness building of here's what the costs are. Because I think people get that there's big things they can do. They can change the way they live their life around transportation, things they can eat, but I don't think they understand the full costs of the clothes we wear or any other decisions that we make every single day of our lives. And I think just to have this other part out there and have the city, leading by example of how much our choices are affecting climate change negatively and what we can do about it is something that is going to be very powerful. And like Dr. Hollenkamp talked about, the next step is going to be how would we implement that, changing kind of how we use kind of the city enterprise in an equitable way.
Great, thank you. Did you want to add anything?
Just if there's more questions about it. This is a first small step. That staff direction was even a smaller step that we took a few months ago when we started to realize we need to agree on some figure for what is the social cost of carbon. I think the example when we talked about the fleet, our fleet of cars or those purchases is kind of a next step to go into. Okay, when we're making big decisions or if we'd had this in place before we built our new building, we could have had those internal discussions about, well, we think this brings a lot of great value to invest in this kind of energy or this kind of vehicle because of this external cost of carbon. So that's kind of the first step, but this is just getting us to agree on a number, basically, of what it is. And if it's $42 a ton a year, then at least we know what that number is, because it really seems to help people put things into a monetary number to understand it better. So that's what we're trying to do.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from my colleagues? All right, thank you so much for this information. Thank you for your hard work on it. I move approval of receiving and filing a report relating to the establishment of a social cost of carbon to use in climate and energy policy and the passage of a resolution establishing the social cost of carbon for use in climate and energy policy. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and that item carries. And our last item on the agenda. Yes. And our last item on the agenda for today is item number 14, passage of a resolution adopting a sustainable building policy. Welcome back, Mr. Havey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm not going to do a presentation on this. We talked about the impact that buildings have on greenhouse gas emissions in the city. I'll reiterate a couple of high-level points that we've got to get about 3/4 of our GHG emissions from buildings. Of that 3/4, 70% are coming from commercial and large multifamily buildings. So we need to look at how we can actually create a path towards a glide path towards carbon neutrality and net zero energy emissions in our new building stock and in major renovations. And so this has been discussed for quite some time with a number of different departments, including CPED, the Housing Policy and Development, Economic Development, Policy and Development, within our coordinator's office in sustainability, finance, and property services, and amongst council offices as well. We've also had an opportunity to review some of this with our friends over at the University of Minnesota Center for Sustainable Building Research, Fresh Energy, SEAC, EVAC, and others. We've talked with our Clean Energy Partnership utility partners, as well as solicited outside input through CPED emailing and conversations with businesses. So the attached resolution to this request for council action is asking that a sustainable building policy be developed for 4 different areas: multifamily affordable housing, 1 to 3 unit housing, economic development projects, and city-owned or leased buildings and facilities, and to report back no later than the 3rd quarter of 2020 to the council with a proposal on how we are going to implement a sustainable building policy across all those 4 sectors.
All right, thank you so much for that information. Are there any questions or comments? Councilmember Gordon.
Appreciate that report. I did want to make a small addition and add a whereas clause to the resolution, and I think my aide's going to bring in copies of that, but I had some discussions this morning with some folks about it, and actually it was interesting because most of the discussions centered around biodiversity a little bit, and could you put something in the building code that refers to this? And so this is, I'll read the whereas clause here in case it doesn't actually come in, but it would say, whereas environmentally sustainability and higher energy efficiency of buildings will contribute to improved ecological function necessary to ensure the food security, water supply, and well-being of humans and other life forms, including birds, pollinators, and wildlife. And so it's just giving us another finding to make that sustainable buildings will also have an impact on wildlife and nature in that way. I think this is kind of a placeholder then later for when we're developing some of these policies and standards to remember that. So I would, and I reviewed that with my co-author, and he's found that acceptable as well, and I don't think staff would have any objections. So I'd like to move it with that added clause, which I'll forward to everybody if we don't get it soon.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions or comments? Councilmember Schrader.
I'll be really brief. I just want to thank staff as well as CPED staff. I know this was a lot to get to this policy, but it's something that here when developments are coming up, they do want to know what else they can do. And while there's a lot of things that new buildings can be doing, I think this sets up a direction of how we can be helpful in the standard we're going to be setting in the future.
Thank you. All right, we have a motion on the floor for approval of item number 14, passage of the resolution adopting a sustainable building policy with as amended and amended as read by Councilmember Gordon. Thank you. Are there any questions, comments? All right, seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. The ayes have it, and that item carries. Thank you, everyone, so much. This was a really powerful day when it comes to talking about environmental sustainability, climate change, and what are we doing as a locality? How are we taking responsibility? Today was a powerful day for that, and so thank you so much for all the work that was brought forward today. With no further business before us, we'll see you all next year.
Thanks, Chair. Great job.